Mankind faces big problems, and man has made many organizations to try to address those problems. There are problems with health, the pandemic, so man has made organizations to deal with that. There's problems with social injustice. Man has made organizations to handle that. There are problems with climate change. Man has made organizations to address that. However, we know that mankind is limited. Even with good intentions, man can only do so much. There's only so much money, resources, and time that man can use. And even if man had all that they needed, they still wouldn't be able to correctly address the issues. They wouldn't even be able to agree on a solution. Well, we know that there is a solution, and that Jehovah God has an organization. And his organization is going to fix all of the problems that exist. What we're going to do today is talk about how we know that Jehovah, his organization, is on the move. It is dynamic. We have a place in it, and we can move ahead with it. Let's start off by first seeing how we can be so sure that Jehovah has the power and the wisdom to address man's problems. We'll start by looking at some verses in the book of Job. Please open your Bible to Job chapter 38, and we're going to look at a few verses 31 through 33. And here, Job is being talked to by Jehovah through a windstorm. And Jehovah is giving Job some perspective. Notice what Jehovah says, Job 38, verse 31. Can you tie the ropes of the Kaima constellation, or untie the cords of the Kisel constellation? Can you lead out a constellation in its season, or guide the Ash constellation along with its sons? Do you know the laws governing the heavens, or can you impose their authority on the earth? You notice in these verses, Jehovah mentions 3 constellations. One of these constellations that he mentions is the Kisel constellation. And we know that constellation now as Orion. And we see that in the picture here. Now, what have you learned about constellations in school or later? Well, we know that those stars, although they look like they're close together, they are very far apart from one another. And they're very far from the Earth. If you look at the top right bright yellow star in the Orion constellation, that star is called Betelgeuse. Betelgeuse is hundreds of light years away from the Earth. How far is it from the other stars? If you look at those middle 3 stars, the center one is 4 times as far from Earth as Betelgeuse. Yet every night, those stars in the Orion constellation maintain their fixed relative positions with one another. And that's the way it is to the whole night sky. It's so reliable that mankind can even navigate by means of the stars. Why are they like that? It's like Jehovah said in verse 33, he established the laws governing the heavens. Jehovah has the ability to organize, especially when we consider how many stars there are. One estimate says that there are 300 sextillion stars. Look at that number. That is 3 trillion times 100 billion. That's a 3 with 23 zeros after it. That is a number we can't even wrap our heads around. Yet who put those stars there? Who had the idea of creating one star with its power? And who was able to place many stars, 300 sextillion stars in the universe? Now we know that the stars do move over time, so their relative positions will change. However, what we see night after night is the same fixed position. Jehovah's ability to organize his wisdom and power, unmatched. And man has seen that he even has the stars organized. Not mankind's drawing out of organizing stars, but they have seen stars are organized into galaxies. Galaxies can have billions or even trillions of stars. Galaxies are organized into groups of galaxies are organized into clusters. Clusters of groups of galaxies of stars are organized into superclusters. Who did it? Jehovah God. Think of all the organization it takes to keep all of these celestial bodies moving. And now think of the organization sometimes it takes for us to keep our closets organized. Jehovah is amazing. He's awe-inspiring. And that organization that he has extends also to his intelligent creation. There's a large number of angels in heaven. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 10, it says that there were 10,000 times 10,000 angels before him in heavenly court. That's 100 million angels. Imagine a stadium with 100 million people in it who all go to meet at the same time to discuss something. No problem for Jehovah. On earth, we as Jehovah's Witnesses are organized. Throughout the world, we have different branches. Branches within those have regions. We have circuits. Within circuits, there are congregations. Within the congregations, there are field service groups. The organization comes right along down the line because we are worshiping Jehovah, the God of organization. Well, here's a question. Is all of the organization that we see just for the sake of keeping things neat and orderly so that Jehovah doesn't lose things? Well, there is purpose in Jehovah's organization. The heavenly part and the earthly part of Jehovah's organization, we are unified to carry out his will. In Revelation chapter 14, verse 6, it mentions that there was an angel in mid-heaven who had everlasting good news to declare to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. So although we as Jehovah's Witnesses have the work of speaking to people, of writing letters, calling them on the phone, the angels support the preaching work. They help direct it. And we know there are so many examples. Maybe that was the case with you, where people are at a crossroads in their life. They don't know what to do. Maybe they cry out to God for help, and then they hear the knock on the door. Or maybe they saw the literature cart. Or maybe they received a letter in the mail or got a phone call. And on our end, we know we had no insight onto the situation, but the angels do. Jehovah uses the heavenly part of his organization along with the earthly part to accomplish his will. On our website, we learn how many languages we preach in. And that's significant because in Revelation 14, verse 6, it said that that angel had everlasting good news to declare to people of every tongue. So how many tongues do we preach in? Well, on jw.org, our website's translated in over 1,040 languages. And those languages are not just languages spoken by tens of millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people even. Some of them are spoken by just a small group. For example, Albanian Sign Language has less than 10,000 speakers, or those who sign that language. So why do we put so much effort, so much time and resources into translating? A global company would not invest money to try to reach a very small group of people. It wouldn't make any sense. So why do we do it? What's the big picture? What's the purpose? Let's find out. Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1, and we're going to look at verses 8 through 10. Here the Apostle Paul writes about Jehovah. This undeserved kindness he caused to abound toward us in all wisdom and understanding, by making known to us the sacred secret of his will. It is according to his good pleasure that he himself purposed for an administration at the full limit of the appointed times, to gather all things together in the Christ, the things in the heavens and the things on the earth. So what is the purpose? Why are we doing the preaching work? What does Jehovah want to happen? Like it says at the end of verse 10, his purpose is to gather all things together in the Christ. The things in the heavens, being those 144,000 who will rule with Jesus, and the things on the earth, all of us who will enjoy everlasting life on the earth. And what does he use to that end? Verse 10 says that he has an administration or a managerial procedure for doing things. He has an organized way to accomplish that. And it's not just because he needs to keep things neat and organized and not lose them, make sure everything's in place. Although he is wise and understanding, verse 9 says that it's according to his good pleasure. It makes Jehovah happy to see us working along with his will. How can we contribute to the unification of Jehovah's organization? What can we do, besides the preaching work, to show that we are going to move ahead and work right along with his purpose? The Apostle Paul explained a few chapters later in Ephesians chapter 4. Let's look at the first 3 verses and notice 5 qualities that we can show. Ephesians 4 verse 1 starts off, "Therefore I, the prisoner in the Lord, appeal to you to walk worthily of the calling with which you are called, with all humility and mildness, with patience, putting up with one another in love, earnestly endeavoring to maintain the oneness of the Spirit in the uniting bond of peace." So see those 5 qualities that Paul mentions here: humility, mildness, patience, love, peace. How do those qualities contribute to unity, to good organization? Well, it's easy to think about it if we think of the opposite qualities. What are some opposites of humility, mildness, patience, love, and peace? Well, how about pride, hate, impatience? And when we see those things in the world, what do we see? Divisions, cultural superiority, racial superiority, national superiority. But as Jehovah's Witnesses, we avoid those qualities, and instead we focus on showing the ones that contribute to the uniting bond of our brotherhood. So how is Jehovah's organization unified? Well, the heavenly part and the earthly part work together with the preaching work. And we can contribute to the unity not only by the preaching work, but also by our Christian personality. There are many other qualities that we can display, but as we do that, we are helping out in contributing to that unification, to that unity. Now, how can we be sure that Jehovah is actively working now to accomplish his purpose? That he didn't just write or have the scriptures written for us so that a few thousand years later we could kind of look back and see what to do and then kind of deal with things as they happen. How do we know that his organization is on the move? Well, Jehovah wants us to remember that his organization is dynamic, and he has revealed some things in the scriptures to help us know that. One thing that he did was he gave Ezekiel a vision of a celestial chariot. That celestial chariot representing Jehovah's heavenly, or the heavenly part of Jehovah's organization. Let's look at a few of those features of the celestial chariot. Ezekiel chapter 1. We'll notice some of the features and also how it affected Ezekiel. Just as a basis for this, Ezekiel 1 verses 4 and 5 mentions a couple features of this vision. In the middle of verse 4, Ezekiel sees a huge cloud and flashing fire. Verse 5, he describes 4 living creatures. So here in this huge cloud, flashing fire, the 4 living creatures, he sees with them the celestial chariot. Let's look at a few verses and see what or how he describes it. Verse 14. He says, "And when the living creatures would go forth and return, their movement had the appearance of flashes of lightning." Verse 17, he describes the wheels of the chariot. He says, "When they moved, they could go in any of the 4 directions without turning as they went. Their rims were so high that they inspired awe, and the rims of all 4 were full of eyes all around." Verse 20 says, "They would go where the Spirit inclined them to go, wherever the Spirit went. The wheels would be lifted up together with them, for the Spirit operating on the living creatures was also in the wheels." And what do we see in the picture here? This celestial chariot. And you remember what we read in verse 14? That the chariot moved like flashes of lightning. We see the lightning in the picture, able to move in an instant. Verse 15, or verse 17, says that the wheels can go in any direction without turning. When we drive a car and we want to turn to the right or left, We have to slow down. We may even have to stop to turn. Jehovah's organization doesn't have to do that. The rooms were so high in verse 18, they inspired awe. Verse 20 says, they would go where their spirit inclined them to go. Jehovah, using his Holy Spirit, his active force directs his chariot. He can move long distances with these large wheels depicted by the celestial chariot. The eyes all around, we've learned before, show how he can look far off into the distance. So that gives us a glimpse of the action in the heavens, the way things go. Now, how did Ezekiel feel about this? Look at this next picture from our Pure Worship book. We see how Ezekiel is in awe. He is overtaken by this tempestuous wind, by this magnificent sight of the celestial chariot. The trees are even bending. I love what it says in our Pure Worship book, chapter 3, paragraph 20. It says, Ezekiel's vision at this point may move us to ask ourselves, am I really in awe of Jehovah's chariot? We need to remember that the chariot represents a reality that exists right now. Never should we imagine that Jehovah, his son, and all the angels might be blind to some problem that discourages us. Nor should we worry that our God will be late in responding to our needs, or that his organization will fail to adapt to some new challenge arising in the volatile world around us. We do well to remember that Jehovah's organization is active, ever on the move. Don't you feel that that's the case? Haven't you seen that in the last year and a half of the pandemic? How we've moved to Zoom for our meetings? How things have happened so quickly, and Jehovah's organization responds. Sometimes we've been ahead of the governments with some of the changes we've made. It's not because of mankind's wisdom, it's because Jehovah is behind that chariot. Now, how do we see other ways that his organization is on the move, reflected in the earthly part of his organization? We'll look at two prophecies in the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 60, that show that his organization is on the move. Isaiah 60. The first one that we'll look at has to do with organizational refinements. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 17. We read here, instead of the copper, I will bring in gold. And instead of the iron, I will bring in silver. Instead of the wood, copper, and instead of the stones, iron. And I will appoint peace as your overseers, and righteousness as your task assigners. So you see what is indicated in this verse? An improvement of materials. Copper becoming something better, gold. Iron becoming something better, silver, and so on. So how does that indicate organizational refinements? Things keep getting better all the time. And the reason is because we understand the scriptures better. Because Jehovah reveals that understanding to the faithful and discreet slave. One example that we've seen things get better, like copper turning to gold, is with the elder arrangement. Maybe you were alive many decades ago when we didn't have a body of elders as we have now, but there was a brother in the congregation who was the company servant, later the congregation servant, the congregation overseer. And at that time, without the body, he would make the decisions in the congregation. Well, in the late 1960s, the governing body studied the first century congregation to see how it was organized. And they saw that there was not just one elder taking the lead, but there was a theocratically appointed, qualified group of brothers, a body of elders. So there was a change then in 1972, a change like copper to gold, where now instead of the one brother, there was a body of elders who qualified according to the scriptures. Now, how is that an improvement like copper to gold? Well, here's three ways. One way is it reminds us that the head of the congregation isn't a man, but it's Jesus Christ. And that actually helps to unify the heavenly part with the earthly part. A second way it's an improvement is there's an accomplishment through many advisors. Instead of one man having to make all the decisions, This group of theocratic, scripturally appointed men consider different suggestions. They reach decisions together, considering the needs of the congregation and individuals. And those decisions harmonize with Bible principles. A third way that it's an improvement is it helps us to be able to keep up with the growing needs in the congregation. Back in 1971, before the elder arrangement started as we know it today, there are 27,000 congregations. Now there's over 120,000 congregations. That growth is made easier by having bodies of elders. And Jehovah trains elders. Another improvement, like iron to silver. Elders get training like the Kingdom Ministry School, like the school for the body of elders, or the school for congregation elders. That type of improvement, that type of training makes sense because we are in the end of the last days. And Jehovah wants his sheep, his witnesses, to be safe and protected and secure as we approach the Great Tribulation. And that leads us to another way that Jehovah's directing his earthly part of the earthly part of his organization. And that's the last verse of Isaiah 60. Verse 22. This has to do with numerical growth. Notice this prophecy. The little one will become 1,000, and the small one a mighty nation. I myself, Jehovah, will speed it up in its own time. What does this indicate? A growth in the number of those who worship Jehovah. In 1960, a little over 60 years ago, there were less than 1 million witnesses, 850,000 witnesses. Now, we have 10 times that many publishers. And that growth is seen in many countries. The pandemic hasn't stopped us. We've heard reports knowing that there have been record increases in many countries of publishers. Who's responsible for that growth? Is it one or two very wise people around the world who thought, how can we get the numbers larger in this country and that country? No, verse 22 says, I myself, Jehovah, will speed it up in its own time. Verse 17 said, instead of the copper, I will bring in gold. Jehovah's doing this. He's making things better. He's causing the increase. This is the same one who made the stars, the same one who directs the chariot, the same one who shows us how to live, the qualities to display. Without a doubt, Jehovah's organization is dynamic. And the Brotherhood is really amazing when we think of what's accomplished with imperfect people. And we see that unity on Zoom. During our midweek meetings, our weekend meetings, when we're tied into Zoom or the ministry, we see all of our brothers and sisters in gallery view. We see the different cultures, the different backgrounds, the different ages, the different races, the different languages. And we're unified. We're united. If you put a dozen people at a table, people who don't know Jehovah, strangers, different ages, races, backgrounds, languages, what will you get at that table? You might get silence. You might get arguing. You won't have unity. Now you take a dozen Jehovah's Witnesses and you put us around a table. People who we haven't even met. Different ages, races, backgrounds, languages. What do you get? An encouraging evening, laughter, maybe a good dinner after convention. It's completely different in Jehovah's organization. We are so united. The broadcast unites us. We see examples in brothers and sisters around the world who have completely different backgrounds going through the same types of problems as us. Jehovah's helping them out the same way. Without a doubt, Jehovah unites us. Why? Because he is in control of his chariot. The organizations that Satan has today, although some are working towards trying to make good improvements, they will be gone. Jehovah doesn't need those organizations. The organizations that go against Jehovah, he's going to wipe those out too. In the future, All of Satan's organizations will be destroyed. There will be universal harmony. So what do we do about it? Knowing that fact, what should we do? Let's find out what Peter said in our final verses. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 11 through 13. He says, "Since all these things are to be dissolved in this way, consider what sort of people you ought to be in holy acts of conduct and deeds of godly devotion, as you await and keep close in mind the presence of the day of Jehovah, through which the heavens will be destroyed in flames and the elements will melt in the intense heat. But there are new heavens and a new earth that we are awaiting according to his promise. And in these, righteousness is to dwell." Since all these things are going to be dissolved, since Satan's organizations are going to be gone, since Jehovah is going to make things better, what do we do? Well, Peter exclaims to consider what sort of people we are. People in holy acts of conduct. What does that mean? What does it mean to have holy acts of conduct? That has to do with what we do. How do we act? How do we conduct ourselves? Are we known as humble, mild, patient, loving, peaceable people? Do we show the Christian personality with workmates, with schoolmates, with our family members? Absolutely, because we are considering what sort of people we are. The verse continued and mentioned deeds of godly devotion. What does that mean? Our deeds of godly devotion are things that we do that show our loyalty to Jehovah, how we are sticking to him. Things like Bible reading, our ministry, personal study, prayer. Those things are deeds of godly devotion. So we consider what we're doing. And what do? We give our best to Jehovah. And that makes him happy. Now those verses also mentioned in verse 12, as you await and keep close in mind the presence of the day of Jehovah. What does that mean to keep close in mind? Imagine a pregnant woman. Let's say she's pregnant for 8 months. It's obvious she's pregnant. One day, is she going to go look in the mirror and say, "Oh my goodness, I forgot I'm pregnant"? No. From the moment that she finds out she's pregnant, her perspective changes. Her goals may change. Where she lives may change. The paint on the wall may change. She has it close in mind. So we keep close in mind what's going to happen. Jehovah's Day. What's going to happen next? We're waiting for the cry of peace and security, the beginning of the Great Tribulation. And then what? The destruction of false religion, the attack of Gog and Magog, Armageddon. And then what? We see in this picture the new heavens and the new earth. That unstoppable chariot will continue on forever. The rapid progress that we see in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy will continue and accelerate. We will enjoy the first day after Armageddon. We're going to get the new scrolls. Our minds and bodies will be made perfect. We will have a restored paradise earth. We're going to build houses and live in them. We're going to educate people with a new education. We're going to see our resurrected loved ones. We're going to live long enough to see the constellations change. All of that is in store for us as we stick to Jehovah's organization. Remember who's driving the chariot. Don't be a backseat driver. Enjoy the ride. Never forget that you and I are part of a universal organization that has been moving. Stick with it and move ahead with Jehovah's organization forever.